Hi, everybody. This is a really cool type of writing that I think builds better writers and is very, very successful both in yearbooks and in newspapers. I started it a few years ago after teaching a workshop in Texas where I was introduced to it by a gentleman named David Knight. It is a concept created by Brady Dennis of the St. Petersburg Times, and I'll tell you a little bit about it as we go into it. But I want to tell you something I think is pretty interesting. My students in my advanced program at Dow High were convinced that they should just be allowed to work on production, and of course they could make no mistakes, and they were just perfect children. And when I did this slideshow for them and then told them that they were going to need to do them, they were like, what? Totally out of their comfort zone. And I think one of the reasons why is because it is a little bit intimidating to need to do this if you do it correctly. And that is approaching pretty much a stranger to do this story. So let me start with the 300 word and tell you Brady Dennis, as you can see, was a Night Cops reporter. And he started writing 300 words in 2004, and he's won several awards for his writing. And when he was interviewed by the Pointer, one of the questions was, what was the easiest thing about doing them? And he really believes, and so do I, that each person not only has a story to tell, but each person has a story that matters. Keep that in mind as you look for your person. What did you learn about writing short stories with a beginning, middle, and end? It doesn't take 3,000 words to put together a beginning, middle, and end. Good story is a good story no matter the length. And I believe truly that the shorter ones are more powerful. He believes that you need to tell people something about the world that matters, to be journalists and not simply storytellers. And I do believe that 300 words does that. Has it made him a better reporter? And I can justify or attest to this too with my students that it does make you a better reporter, because this is one of those rare times you're going to rely almost primarily on observation. They don't have very many quotes, and he didn't interview people as much as he simply shut his mouth and watched and listened. We don't do that enough. Does that mean that you don't use quotes in stories in newspapers? Absolutely not. This type of story works better as an observation type story. It's a kind of cool one to introduce to people who may be just a little afraid of interviewing multiple sources or don't have the skills to do the synthesis and put them together, blend them. So in a lot of ways it's a good starter story that you can try. Here's the first one about a gentleman named Lloyd Blair. And this PowerPoint, you can use with your students. That's what I'm using it with you for, is just to kind of show you how I would teach it. And here's the story. The few drivers on this dark, lonely stretch of the Suncoast Parkway in Pasco County pull up to the toll booth, hand their dollars to Lloyd Blair, and then speed away. None of them know it was why the old man sits here night after night working the graveyard shift. Well, here's why. Because years ago, on a freezing winter night at a party in Queens, New York, he met a woman named Millie. Because he fell in love with her brown hair and wide eyes and 100-watt smile. Because they got married, moved to Staten Island, had a son, and worked for decades in Manhattan. She as an accountant, he as a banker. Because it had been their dream to retire to Florida, and so they saved all their lives to make it possible. Because just as they began to talk of leaving New York and heading south, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and they spent their time and money traveling to New Jersey, San Diego, and Mexico in search of a cure. Because in the end, they came to Florida anyway. Because they finally bought a house in Spring Hill, although she was too weak that day to get out of her car. Because she died 9 days later on January 5th, 2002, a day the whole sky fell, he says. Because after she was gone, he found himself alone and $100,000 in debt. And so he took a job collecting tolls. The drivers who pass by see a smiling 71-year-old man with blue eyes and a gray mustache who tells each of them, "Have a great night." They don't know the rest of Lloyd Blair's story, or that he keeps Millie's picture in his shirt pocket, just under his name tag, just over his heart. I then pose these questions after, sometimes the kids will react, so I gave them goosebumps. And one time when I did it with advisors, I had a lady crying. I think her mother had just died of cancer, so it was just you kind of do get some emotions out of the piece. But I ask about the literary device, and we talk about the repetition, and then the next story, and anything else they want to talk about. Actually, I do ask them. I'll say, where's he keep his name tag, and where did he meet his wife, and what were their occupations. Most of the time, the kids can yell out the answers. One of the reasons is because it's short, but I also think it's memorable. Okay, so here's the next one. The Man in the Mask. Inside the locker room, the drifter drifts to sleep. He pays no attention to the country music blaring outside, or the bulls pacing restlessly, or the bull riders swaggering in too tight Wranglers. They call him Stretch, a wild man, a bullfighter, the American kind, who paints his face clown-like and dresses in red and throws himself willingly into the path of angry beasts who have just bucked cowboys to the ground. When he was 14, the road called, and Stretch answered. He ran away from home and landed at an Oklahoma rodeo and has lived 100 lifetimes since. He's slept at truck stops, on the shoulder of highways, in the dirt beside livestock. He's drunk his share of Jack Daniels. He's been tattooed a half a dozen times in a half a dozen cities. Dipped enough Copenhagen to roof a house with the tin cans. He's been arrested for fighting. Found a girlfriend in Utah named Casey. He stared down 1,000 bulls in 1,000 nowhere towns from Tennessee to Texas, Montana to Mississippi. The bulls have knocked out his front teeth and broken his arms, ribs, ankles, tailbone, collarbone, and kneecap. They've given him more concussions and stitches and joy than he can measure. I live kind of different, Stretch says, smiling toothlessly. Back in Kansas, the family never understood. His dad's a lawyer, his sister a dentist. His brothers turned out normal, too. But Stretch, well, he lives kind of different. He owns 2 bags of clothes and probably won't ever own much else, except this. I'll have a lot of good stories. And maybe that's enough. Maybe, unlike so many people, he has found the place he belongs, in the ring with the other untamed souls, kicking up dust and mud. The drifter opens his eyes. Showtime. Again, I ask about the literary devices. We talk about alliteration, and yep, that's about all we talk about. One of the things I do then is I ask, what do you roof his house with? What's his drink of choice? What, does, what's his sister do for a living? Because she's a dentist, which is pretty funny. And the other thing is, when you, later in this course, you're going to watch an editing video by Lori Oglesby, and she talks about how adverbs should contradict instead of complement. So, for example, Roberta Flack's song, Killing Me Softly, that's kind of a contradiction. Smiled toothlessly. Most people who have no teeth don't smile. So that's a great use of an adverb. And this just, I think one of the things that bothered me about this story was the part where he says, let me go back here, right here. He's slept at truck stops, he's drunk his share of Jack Daniels, he's been tattooed, he's been arrested for fighting, he found a girlfriend in Utah named Casey. And I thought, this is really not Brady Dennis's usual smooth writing style. And then I realized, in his own way, this is his way, kind of using quotes or the voice of the interviewee, because I suspect that what was happening is Stretch was talking. I've slept at truck stops. I drink Jack Daniels. I've been tattooed in a half dozen cities. I got a girlfriend named Casey. I got arrested for fighting. That's my guess. I think he was trying, in a way, to mimic the voice of Stretch. Okay, so when I was at MSU teaching this course a few years ago, I had students try them. And one of my students was Mike Schmidt, who you see there. And I had another student who, when I asked students what their fear was about being an advisor, she said she was really afraid she wouldn't be able to coach writing because she really didn't feel that she was that strong of a writer. And I'd just like you to see what she wrote, because I think she's a real strong writer. Oh, and by the way, too, that day, Schmitty said, do we have to stay here, or can we go someplace to interview? I said, you can go wherever you want. And they said, okay, you guys, let's meet at the Peanut Barrel. And quite a few of my students left. Okay, the sign said no jumping. He argues he didn't see it before he flung himself off the gorge in Ithaca, New York that summer. It begged to be jumped. Then again, anyone who knows him knows he's certainly not one who obeys the signs. That jump got Mike Schmitty to just about everyone, his first of 3 arrests in his 21 years, technically. A look at his police record will turn up arrests for an MIP and a minor driving with a BAC of .07, he's quick to point out, but Michigan's a no-tolerance state. That's a bit about Schmitty. He'll give more details between swigs of a Bud Light bottle at a local bar to anyone who wants to hear them. Then again, anyone who knows this kid knows he's certainly not one to be judged by a police record. Because a police record won't turn up evidence of the 6 summers he spent all over the country in group work camps with his church, kind of like Habitat for Humanity, he'll inform you. It won't tell you he was in Ithaca at one of these camps when he made that fateful jump. It won't show his homecoming sash, his quiet donations to cancer research funds, his 1,633 friends on Facebook, his award-winning high school newspaper column on being a suicidal teenager. Perhaps this explains the tat. Want to judge Schmitty? Look at his left calf. Look at it both ways. From one angle, the tattoo ink spells change. Turn it around and it says growth. Like Schmitty, it looks like one thing from a certain perspective, but becomes something totally different when you look again. Like a suicidal high schooler in the homecoming court. Like an indiscriminating police record. Like an Ithaca gorge just begging to be jumped. Now, you will get this PowerPoint. I'll put it in separately without my voice behind it, and you can use it. And I did put portions of stories that my students wrote at the high school level. I would say to you, you're going to be assigned a 300-word story, and there are a couple rules. Actually, there's one very simple rule. It has to be 300 words. I don't want it 299. I don't want it 301. Try very hard to get it to 300. What happens is you may write it, and you may be 327. It is really a great exercise to try to pare it down. It's kind of like, it's one of the reasons I really like Twitter. I think it makes you a better writer because you have to, you don't have a whole lot of time to say what you need to say. And so you'll need to go back through and edit. And I'm asking when you submit these to submit them double-spaced. I think it's easier to look at them that way. And certainly ask me any questions in the discussion forum on Tuesday, tomorrow, if you have any. I'm going to talk about some other things, and I'm going to do it during the forum. There's a lot more to writing, and I have a lot more things to put in there. But curricular-wise, I'm going to talk about how I approached writing in a beginning journalism class and give you an opportunity to share what you've done or what you think would really work or what really works. So anyway, thank you for listening, and I will put up the real PowerPoint when I get a chance. Talk to you later.